Hi, everybody. In my arms are two of the most wonderful furry souls in this universe, I swear. This is Fluffy, and was named Fluffy after my granddaughter Hannah in Philadelphia, who took one look at this little one when he was a baby and said, "It's Fluffy." So that name stuck. And then his brother, this is Chocolate. Chocolate is the one who has the eyes the color of the blue sky that are hard to see because he has this mask. And I love these guys. And I want to thank so many of you who write cards. Here, I'll try to get them up a little higher. Who write cards about them and say, thank you for sharing them. And they share their cats with me. And I have gotten photos from people, and I'm putting them down so they'll run around and go around. But because so many people are writing now about show us Chocolate and Fluffy, that I'm trying to do that. And in some weeks, Fluffy likes to go and hide and make a game of this. So that's why sometimes I only have Chocolate. But tonight we have both of them for a while. They'll wander around, and maybe Fluffy will end up on the bookcase, as he likes to do sometimes. And for those of you who have been following some of the strangeness in this very room, it was, some of you may not know, that last Wednesday on October 17th, we had the second show up of one of these strange, whatever they are, glowing something that's white. And for those who might not have the whole story, I imagine most of you coming do, but on October 3rd, after we got through with the broadcast, it was the next morning that Lori had emailed me and said that one of our viewers was saying that 2 minutes and 32 seconds into the October 3rd Earthfiles YouTube channel broadcast, that there was something strange back in that upper bookshelf back in the corner. And now we have done a series of video analyses, and tomorrow night I'm going to be doing 3 hours on Coast. And one of my half hours is one of my Earthfiles viewers, who is named Charles Hazard. He has given me permission to use his real name. He sent an extraordinary email about his own experience with having, in total consciousness, not asleep, not dreams, not anything, except that coming through a window was what he said, Linda, it reminds me of your October 3rd, and now we have another one from last week on October 17th, of something that looks sort of like moving smoky fog. In his case, he saw hieroglyphs superimposed somehow in the smoky, foggy material as it moved toward him. And he thought that it touched his forehead. And then he had a download. He said there were so many hieroglyphs, telepathic thoughts. And this is the problem. I've heard this many times, even from people in military and intel. They will get one of these face-to-face telepathic downloads, but the human mind doesn't seem to be able to absorb it. But what information this man ended up having after this download in the rest of his life had to do with interaction with what he called a different and advanced intelligence. And tomorrow night on Coast, I'm going to introduce more about what he said, and I will be then making this story about what we've been experiencing at the Earthfiles YouTube channel, part of my introduction to that story tomorrow night. So for those of you who may have missed that last week, I think it was right after we finished the broadcast, Lori said, here is another email from somebody saying, and in my Earthfiles report tomorrow night, done so that all the videos and still frames and everything will be clear, marked, and you'll be able to compare the October 3, the October 17. You will see that they have been made very easy to study, and we even have a loop. In addition to a wide shot, we have a loop of the one on October 3rd, which is so fascinating. And I've done still frames so that you can see how it goes from that black window on 0 frame and then 1 through 7 frames after, with clear, very clear delineation of whatever this was. Now, by tomorrow night, when I go on Coast, I go live at 11 p.m. Pacific, midnight Mountain, 1 o'clock Central, 2 o'clock East across the country. And I will be doing 4 different half hours. And I think you all, I hope, will find these fascinating. I'm starting with the new work that is going on Planet X or Planet 9 in our solar system with Professor Michael Brown from USC. It's a fascinating project. Then I go into what the IPCC, the most recent UN report about what's happening with our planet and the increasing headlines of so many changes on land, in the sea, and the air. And then Charles Hazard, dealing with a piece of fog like we've been dealing with in this room. And then I have one of the most fascinating stories that ties back to paintings in like 1350 AD. You've seen these paintings where there will be a scene and then there will be some kind of a UFO with a being in it in the sky, but painted like 1350 AD. Well, we're going to go into one of those, only it's 21st century. But like the same thing, raising all kinds of questions about the reality that we are in and the realities that seem to be from elsewhere that penetrate here. They come in and then they leave. Well, one of the aspects that I talk with Charles Hazard about, in addition to the fog and in addition to the alien entities, I've asked people in the abduction syndrome, and he's in that category, in the past year or two, have you had any repeating dreams? Something that's really vivid. And here's what Charles Hazard said. Quote, I think everything is speeding up now. Something is about to happen. I get this feeling of urgency, and something is coming either to fix what's wrong with our planet or maybe to help some of us before it is too late to do anything about our current situation. I've had many dreams over the past few years involving water, mostly water. I've had many dreams of tsunamis from the ocean. I wasn't surprised when I saw recently in Indonesia where the water had come in and destroyed so much. He said, I've seen this in these vivid dreams. Well, I asked him, do you get the sense in your dreams that it's a worldwide problem or specific to an area? He said, I think it's worldwide. And I said, you are thinking about that right now in your mind's eye, and whatever images you are seeing in your mind's eye, what is the cause of all this flooding? And he answered, gut feeling. And it has something to do with the rotation of our planet, of our Earth. There's going to be like a shift or a jolt or something kind of like you would take a glass of water and you accidentally knock your elbow and the water splashes out like over the rim of the glass. He said, that's the feeling that I get. About 18 years ago, at the beginning of this century, there were a lot of headlines about two scientists from Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory in around 2000, 2001, who were presenting data from where they had studied the core drillings from the bottom of the present-day Black Sea that comes near the Mediterranean. And they said the cores were telling a strange story, and that what they were measuring were depths where once upon a time the water was at one level, and then after the last ice age, which was 18,000 years ago, when water had been sucked up into the ice, it began to melt pretty rapidly. And that between 18,000 years ago and 8,600 years ago, that they had evidence that there was the water that was at one level in the Black Sea burst, and there was a real flood. And they get this from the measurements that they were making. As they said, all hell broke loose. And they think that what happened in that Black Sea area could be the explanation for the Bible's Genesis story about Noah and the ark. None of us today think that anybody gathered all of those animals from all over the world into a boat. But what has even come up in some of the abduction cases is that what Noah's flood was really about were other intelligences that knew that there was this big change happening from when the last ice age on this planet reached its peak 18,000 years ago. And that's when there would have been the most ice. And then it's started melting ever since and warming. So we're in a post-glacial period. But when the abductees have had downloads about these issues of what was Atlantis, what was Noah's Ark, and these kinds of questions coming from Bibles and books, one of the implications has been that Noah's Ark was an effort by other intelligences interacting with our planet to gather DNA from every living specimen on the planet to preserve it through what would be a catastrophic event, which is what Noah's Ark is described in Genesis as being only a family survived. Now, when you consider the possibility that there is some physical evidence that Noah's Ark and a flood might have happened around the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, that isn't the whole planet. What might happen, like Charles Hazard keeps getting an impression, of tsunamis and water all around our planet? Is there any natural mechanism that could kick this into gear? 2.5 years ago, I had a very long discussion with a physicist who's in the category of being a whistleblower. And one of the issues that we were talking about is that there are natural cycles that have to do with a galactic scale that he had been exposed to in some work that he was doing. And he said that one of the issues that has come up in his work for our government as a whistleblower physicist, meaning he's a physicist who's talking to me, is that there could be astronomical events, maybe related to the black hole at the center of our Milky Way galaxy, that periodically that there are big energy exchanges of some sort, and that in these big energy exchanges, it could have an impact, say, on throughout the Milky Way galaxy and affect our planet. And this also relates to the question of what is it that provokes the magnetic poles to change. Now, he told me in the same spirit that I'm going to share this with you, that no hard data exist, these are hypotheses based on measurements, that there might be events that happen in some kind of a cycle we don't understand that cause a magnetic field impact, like a snap. It may or may not stay. It may be related to when the magnetic poles do change, like they did 870,000 years ago, and they haven't changed away from that for any other time period since then. But there may have been periodic changes in the magnetic poles that we have yet to discover. And that when there might be some kind of an impact that would hit the magnetic fields with a snap, it might cause a jerk like what Charles Hazard is saying, water coming out of the glass. And then it might be that all the oceans of the Earth for a short period of time would be affected. Water would go onto the land in great massive quantities before everything would return to normal. Now, I'm bringing this up tonight because recently I have encountered 2 or 3 people in the abduction syndrome who are talking about seeing a lot of water in the future. I had this discussion 2.5 years ago with a physicist, and I'm really curious in the dialogue that we all have been having about the extraordinary experiences of childhood out of body, and I have a file there. I'm wondering if my Earthfiles YouTube channel, that there might be some of you who are in perhaps the human abduction category, whether or not any of you have been having any kind of vivid, they have to be extremely vivid to be in this category, vivid repeating dreams, say for the last few months, not going back much further than a year. If so, I would really like to hear from you, because sometimes it is in our sleep and in our dreams that we do get like something's plucking strings between the future, the present, and the past. And maybe those frequencies get picked up, especially in sleep. And so, as a context for tonight, I really am interested in what you all may be experiencing. And on that note, I am going to throw it open to Lori to ask for your questions and comments, because the dialogue that we are all having is becoming so valuable. Lori.
Hello. We'd like to thank everyone for the amazing and generous super chats tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody, always.
So our first question tonight is from J. Cole Knight. He wants to know, are there any updates to the Alaskan pyramids?
Just this past week, I got a call from the nephew of the original Douglas Muchler, who is the man who had been at Fort Richardson in Alaska in the Army, who called me, said that they had seen 40 guys one night. They saw what they thought was a local patched-in TV station, had a documentary in which physicists had stationed themselves in Antarctica, specifically focused on an area about 60 miles west of then Mount McKinley, today Mount Denali, and that they had focused a physics experiment, a geophysics experiment, that when Lopnor in China did an underground nuclear blast, that they wanted to use that blast, underground China, to measure and look underground in this area in Alaska. And that's what the documentary was about. And he called me to say that he had gone to the TV station in Anchorage that they thought was the broadcaster at Fort Richardson. He asked if he could purchase a copy of the documentary. The general manager said there must be some mistake, that they had not broadcast any documentary about an underground, huge, dark pyramid in Alaska. And as he was leaving, disappointed, Doug Muchler said, a man who had been in the background across the hall, who appeared to perhaps be an engineer, came to the door when he was leaving and said, I overheard your discussion with the general manager. He's not telling you the truth. We did broadcast that documentary, but after the broadcast, we got communication from somebody in the U.S. government to kill, meaning get rid of, that documentary. And that Doug Muchler called me to say, can you see if you can get in touch with the broadcasters in Anchorage to see if you can find this documentary, Linda, because it was amazing. It was about the discovery of a huge pyramid underneath the ground west of Mount McKinley, and that this would be like world-shaking news. And what happened? Why would it have been in a documentary and then all the news killed? So I called and talked with the program directors, the general managers in 2 or 3 of the stations in Anchorage. Only one was, I think it was Channel 13, was the one that Doug Muchler thought had been tied into Fort Richardson. And I was able to go back and find that at the time, the 1993-94 time period when all this occurred, that there had been a change in general management at the station. And I was able to track down the manager who came in, who said that the first general manager and then his 4 years was followed by another general manager, and that during his tenure there was no broadcast like that. But he said, what you probably need is the archive of videos that we had back at the beginning of the 90s. But he said, as far as I know, it all was thrown out. We didn't have money to pay for an archivist. And that would explain what happened to a possible one broadcast through a local station to a piped feed to Fort Richardson that may have happened that night and maybe only a few other times. So in a funny, strange way, being able to talk with the general manager and program directors about what had happened in Anchorage over the last 20-some years did not make Doug Muchler's story about going down and having the original general manager say, no, we don't have it, as viable, because there may have been a fix-in on that first general manager by somebody in the government, and the other general manager would not have known. Further, we now have a document. This is what the call was about last week. We may have a document that has been kicking around with a question mark on it. Was this the legitimate physics, geophysical examination of the seismic frequencies that happen when this Chinese deep underground atomic explosion was set off? And I've seen now the document, and it does have inked in a pyramid in certain structures in Alaska. So now what I want to do is go, the next step is with this document is to talk with a geophysicist about it to find out how legitimate it is. If there are any questions, what are they? How could we resolve them? And in a future Earthfiles YouTube channel, whatever I learn, I'll hold it up, we'll do it, and then I'll do an Earthfiles, a whole Earthfiles where I do the reports with graphics to parallel what we're doing on the Earthfiles YouTube channel, and it'll all come together with graphics, what I learn. And I think finally, this is the part I can't prove, but it's certainly been described to me by people in, let's say, who have worked on geophysical matters. The hypothesis is that a long time ago, maybe 270 million years ago, and maybe 270 million up to somewhere in a million years ago, that a vast timeline on this planet involved advanced one or more intelligences or civilization in which the way they provided energy for everything they needed on this planet, and perhaps energy throughout the solar system, and perhaps even through the entire Milky Way galaxy. It's been described to me as potentially galaxy-wide. That if you understand the mathematical relationship between specific angles of a pyramid, which can be wide or narrower, and you build pyramids of certain heights, angles, and mass, that depends on what they're made out of and how many layers and how many hollows inside, and you put your surface pyramids made out of one material, say limestone, that's white, on the surface of the planet, let's say in Egypt and in South America and Central America and various places on the planet that are critical, and they're above ground. That you also have the physics and the ability to place even larger pyramids, possibly of a black composite, underground, and that it's meant that the two layers, the white and the black, the above ground and the below ground, will work together in some sort of synergistic frequency way, and that once you do that on a planetary system, you have global free energy. Now, what happened on this planet if that were once upon a time an energy grid? What would have destroyed it? What would have perhaps changed the balance of the surface pyramids and the below surface pyramids so that we are denied that ability to have access to that kind of energy? I don't have an answer. I don't know anybody who does. But that would be a question in the context of, have we had other intelligences terraform, inhabit this planet in waves, successive waves going back millions of years, with agendas and goals that we know nothing about, and that maybe there were wars, and maybe the wars between different intelligences are what have left a residue on our planet, on Mars, on Venus, and so forth throughout the solar system, where once upon a time there may have been a much more vibrant and thriving solar system when these structures could survive above and below ground. It's a hypothesis. We don't have hard proof. But if we can find this large pyramid that has been described now by men who were in military or their fathers were in military, and if you want to read more about the Dark Pyramid 60 miles to the west of Mount McKinley, now Denali, go to my Earthfiles.com. On the headlines page up in the search bar, type in Dark Pyramid, and you will see how many in-depth reports that I have done since going back to around 2012 onward. It is a fascinating story, fascinating leaks from people that our military and government probably thought would never, ever either live to tell, or that they would not contradict non-disclosure agreements, and people do. They tell their families, and then their families end up talking to reporters like me. So I've opened up two subjects tonight that I hope some of you out there might be in the whistleblower category, willing to approach me and talk to me about, and that is the issue of, could there be any kind of cyclic astronomical events that could cause global flooding on our planet like Noah's? And could there be truth to the abductees and other people in the hypothesis saying that there have been pyramid builders on the moon, on Mars, maybe even on Venus, the Earth, going back millions and millions of years, and that the pyramid is a energy potential machine if you know how to construct it just correctly for the mass of the sphere, planet, or moon that it's going to be built on with other pyramids. That we humans on Earth, we are missing apparently a lot of information about the true energy potential of pyramid structures. If any of you have any more information in a military government whistleblower context, I would sure like to hear from you, and to know that if you're not comfortable on the phone, which I understand, a lot of people will still use the US mail, and I'm not aware of anybody ripping anything open. So you can hard mail to me, as far as I know, still safely. And on that note, Lori, again, if there are any more questions, I would love to have the dialogue.
Absolutely. So this is a little bit long. It's from our friend Drew, who visits with us every week. So I'm going to give it my best shot.
Okay.
The question is regarding Gary McKinnon. Given his testimony, do you believe his account in the absence of evidence? How is that really different to Corey Good, Emery Smith, etc.? Because the U.S. would pursue anyone who hacked into their systems regardless of what they saw, because they need to set an example.
Right. Gary McKinnon, I like him. I was one of the first to interview him back in that 2002, I believe, is the year that he hacked in to systems in the United States. And I think that I interviewed him, I believe. You can do a search at Earthfiles. My interviews with Gary McKinnon are in my archive, which is organized chronologically, and I believe my first interview with him was 2004. And I still can remember the first time calling him, and I believe he was still there at his mom's where he had been. And the way he told me, and it makes so much sense, he said he had a slow, old modem, and that he, like a lot of people who have great interest about UFOs, that was his interest. Would it be possible to hack into any military bases or, and not even hack? He wasn't thinking in terms of that word today. He was just, as he said, he was just trying URL addresses and finding how easy it was, because there were no really rigid, secure firewalls. And so Gary McKinnon was, let's say, typing in a www.nasa.gov. Let's just say that was the address. And he'd get into NASA. Well, then he would just start guessing at what other URLs might be, and then he'd get into other departments, and he said that's how he ended up on, if some of you may recall, it was, he came into an office through, they must have had something on the computer in the United States like TeamViewer, and that he ends up inside of somebody's computer looking at the work that they have on their computer. And it was a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet had the name and a title, Non-Terrestrial Navigators or Pilots. And non-terrestrial was associated with Solar Warden, SOLARWARDEN. For those, I imagine today, most everybody has heard in passing about Solar Warden. Well, Solar Warden was on this spreadsheet, and there were other indications that there was some kind of extraterrestrial Starfleet, and that he's just looking at this in somebody else's computer on their screen, and then the person that he was looking on their screen and seeing these, and he wrote down what he was seeing. He wrote down the non-terrestrial solar warden and some other things that he was noticing so that he would remember them. Well, whoever's computer that was came back and cut him off. Well, they must have done a search, because I cannot recall precisely now what exactly the legal steps were, but by the time I interviewed him, I think in 2004, Gary was, I think he had been through a lawyer or two, and I think the United States had said they wanted to extradite him, and the UK government, for reasons that have never been quite clear, the UK government denied the US request for extradition. If the UK government hadn't interfered, then Gary McKinnon would have been extradited, and who knows what would have happened. But it was his own government that interfered with and prevented the US playing hardball with Gary McKinnon. And of course, the cat was out of the bag by then, because he did interviews with me and a lot of people about seeing non-terrestrial navigators or pilots and solar warden. And I think that there was a description of something that might fall into the category of an extraterrestrial or interstellar craft. All of that is part of the Gary McKinnon story. And the last time I think I talked with Gary was a year or two ago, and he is a swell human being. He is not a person who you would ever associate with trying to do something that would have been criminal or other. His mother and everybody who knew him defended him. So that's my personal interface with Gary McKinnon. And now what I'm waiting for is we need our US government to tell the truth, that we're not alone in this universe. We never have been. And if we have interstellar trade routes with intelligences that have been coming and going here, we all deserve to know that. Okay, how about one more question?
You got it. What do you think about the hypothesis from Dr. Farrell about humanity being the possession of an ET species? That based on this hypothesis, that there is a galactic economy already in place, and that may be where the missing billions in taxes are being paid, sort of to the landlord.
Yes, I think pieces and facets of all of that are probably true, but the issue is how to prove it. When you go back to Rumsfeld on the day the day before 9/11, and he was announcing that he had done a review of the Department of Defense, and it was, I believe, 3.2 or 3.4 trillion dollars were missing. And then the next day is 9/11, and the idea of the Department of Defense being that much in debt, that should have been the story with 12-inch high letters, it just evaporated in the horror of 9/11. Well, now today, in 2018, the numbers in terms of official or quasi-official leaks about how much now is missing is, I think Rich Dolan has it up to 12 trillion or something. Where is all this money? Where has it all gone? Well, now jump over to the Whistleblowers, which as a journalist, it's you feel this sort of contradiction inside yourself. It's only the people who are in the whistleblower category that can tell you the truth in a lot of this, but they can't go on the record because then they'll be hurt. So any of the whistleblower information, it has that problem. You're kind of in a straitjacket as a reporter. You want to report what you think. Some of these people give you at least some documents. It's hard to prove the documents, but it isn't like I'm hanging in a vacuum on some of what I'm telling you. I've been exposed to quite a few what I would call certainly other, let's put it this way, others who have the same information. And the story going back all the way to the 1980s, I had done A Strange Harvest, the documentary that was broadcast in May 25th, 1980. I meet George Knapp and John Lear and Bob Lazar and Leonard Stringfield and John Keel and Bud Hopkins and John Mack, and there's a group of us who are meeting each other at different conferences and having discussions. And clearly in the 80s, leading up into the early 90s, there were lots of discussions because there were leaks then that underground China Lake in California, Area 51, in underground in Wright-Patterson, underground in ENT, Air Force Base in Colorado. The list goes on of bases that have huge city structures underneath, so that the surface is only one reality, that there are all kinds of underground, huge underground, and that something called continuity of government under the National Programming Office, going all the way back by 1988 or 89, had paid for at least 9 huge underground, we'll call them cities for lack of any other name, in which, in the event of nuclear war, or the wording in the National Programming Office continuity of government documents, according to CNN in a documentary that was aired in 1988, and those were whistleblowers, and they had those whistleblowers on television, on the screen, backlighted and voice altered, who said that they had personal knowledge of the construction of 9 of these huge underground city bases, and that the National Programming Office Continuity of Government's charter had changed from just in the event of nuclear war, they would take a government and important people underground. That the phrase had been either added to or changed to in the event of an extraordinary impact. It could be from outer space or here. They changed the words. And it may have been because they were worried about something happening from literally outer space. Well, whatever is the case behind the original charter, these whistleblowers in the backlighted, voice-altered documentary for CNN, they describe with their own knowledge the various kinds of machinery that were used, the huge structure of what it was like to build underground for X number of people that would be breathing air with machines and laboratories, and the complexity of it, and that you have to have some kind of connection to the outer atmosphere. And one of the photographs that I was shown at that time that led me to an investigation of a ranch. This is a true story. I think it's the only time I've ever told it. I'm not giving away the details of location. I'm just telling you now generally, because it kind of ties into this issue. If you have a lot of underground installations, what evidence do you have above ground? Well, this was a particular case. I've been told that a specific ranch looked like a ranch on the outside, but with a lot of heavy-duty, expensive barbed wire going around a massive border that may have been more expensive to keep in order as it was than a humble rancher. But outside of all of that barbed wire and reinforced, I had been told that if I were able to get to X roads and Y angle, that I'd see what looked like an outhouse. And I found it, and I could see all kind of piping coming up around it. And I have been in other locations where out in a rural area, if you have certain pipes that are coming up out of the ground, it's pretty indicative that it is venting some kind of an underground structure. These pipes wouldn't just be out 10 miles from a pasture where cattle were being raised. So I was able to photograph what I found and show it to the person who had guided me. And then upon doing that, I had a further description that if you went inside of what looked like an outhouse in a rural area, you'd be shocked as you went down a specific inner door to another door, into steps, into hallways that would keep going down into a massive underground complex. Now, that's from a first-hand experience that I had a long time ago. But if you take that and you multiply it around just in the continental boundary of the United States, and if those backlighted whistleblowers from 1988 in the CNN documentary were telling the truth, they had first-hand knowledge of the building of 9 huge underground complexes. Now, another interesting twist here. Where did all that government or that money come from? Was it black money generated from X? Was it appropriated under some other name besides Continuity of Government and National Programming Office, or is that where it was buried? But the kicker from hearing these backlighted guys was the implication that black money sources, think of this question, black money sources from unknown were used to build all of this, because a lot of it had to do with our, I'm going to say, interactions with other intelligences. So again, it's all tantalizing. I have seen some pieces of proof, but we all need the photographs, the videotapes. We need people who have firsthand knowledge that they can prove it. But in the meantime, I think it's absolutely legitimate for all of you and for me, for any reporter anywhere, to be raising these questions. How much of the planet is underground now? How much is black money coming from sources unknown? And how much of it is because we have some sort of a bilateral relationship with one or more non-humans? Okay, on that note, let me see, where am I on time? I could take one more. I'll do a short answer.
Okay, let's see what we have for you. So our last question tonight is, do you think that a lot of the UFOs that we're seeing are just military vehicles that are being tested?
Let me answer with the Tic Tac UFO on the infrared FLIR from December 16th, 2017, and the other gimbal video. Remember when there was the big splash headlines above the fold, front page, New York Times on December 16th, 2017. It was a Saturday, and Lori, you and Michael and I We threw together a YouTube channel that night, remember, to talk about that, wow, this is what we were hoping was going to lead to the bigger headline, we're not alone in the universe, and that it
Right.
might have happened by New Year's Day 2018. And now we're talking tonight on October 24th, 2017. I've got a couple of bets out there with people that we're going to get that headline, we're not alone in the universe, by New Year's Day 2019. That may or may not happen, but I don't mind. It's been fun having these bets because I just cannot believe that we can be on a planet in which we are going to be denied much longer the truth. That we're not alone in this universe, we never have been, and that those, the whole purpose of those infrared videotapes that were released through the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Politico about 1 year ago, well, December, we're almost to November 1st now. The whole bottom line was pilots saying that more than once they were encountering and getting on their jet fighter gun camera, the infrared, and that these unknowns are moving at speeds impossible for a human pilot to survive, that they are doing 90-degree angles, that they are disappearing, popping in and popping out, that what were on those FLIR infrared were nothing resembling terrestrial. That was the whole bottom line of releasing those infrareds with what? Information about Luis Elizondo and his being in the Pentagon, from being the director of an office in the 5th floor C ring of the Pentagon from 2007 to 2012, and that there Luis Elizondo was the head of advanced aerospace threat identification program, and that ATIP was associated with an even antecedent program having to do with warfare, space warfare. What is the relationship of those two in the Pentagon? Why are they using war and threat identification? Is it just to get more money from Congress? Or is it because those are signals that we don't know everything for a long shot? We do not know what is in front of us in the sky if a pilot says this is an unidentified. If it is an unidentified to our most superior pilots in the military, as were the case, like David Fravor, 17 years in the U.S. Navy pilot, if they're saying it's unidentified, they don't recognize this is something that a human pilot could not do. That's what Luis Elizondo and the others at To the Stars that Tom DeLonge has organized, sort of with one of the goals being take some of the black space efforts, what is known, and get it into the white world and do legitimate science and let scientists around the world start dealing with the facts. So, on that score, I would say that people who have worked in the Pentagon, who know a lot about extraterrestrial UFO matters, meaning in terms of unidentifieds, that they would say that neither the Tic Tac and neither the gimbal were known terrestrially in any country, anywhere on the earth. And that's almost as if this was the first big crack of getting to the truth. We're not alone in this universe. There's something out there, lots of somethings out there, highly advanced. And if you want to feel good tonight, after this Earthfiles YouTube channel, think of the interview that John Burroughs and I did in 2015 with Lynn Buchanan on our Phenomena Radio. And Lynn Buchanan had worked for Project Stargate at the for the Defense Intelligence Agency, who Luis Elizondo had worked for too, and that when they were tasked as remote viewers with these talented gifts of being able to extend some part of their consciousness out into the universe, that all of those talented remote viewers working on Project Stargate right next door to the National Security Agency's big Fort Myers shiny building, they always got that the universe is teeming with consciousness or life. Some of it is friendly and some of it is unfriendly. But that right now on planet Earth, our solar system, there are allies, and those allies have been keeping us protected from the unfriendlies. I would love it if we could go forward with everybody on the planet learning the truth and the proof of that, and then coming together finally as a human family instead of tribes fighting each other politically and territorially. So let's try, as we go from 2018 to 2019, for those of us who are already in dialogue with each other, to keep trying to spread these dialogues to others in our family and our friends, that this story is a big one and a whole lot more is coming, and that hopefully on Earthfiles YouTube channel and my Earthfiles report and Phenomena Radio and Ancient Aliens Television and Coast and all, where we are trying to share more truth, that 2019 could be a big year. And on that note, I'll see you next Wednesday, but I hope that you guys who are out there, some of you who may have information on the military side, that you get in touch with me, and I'll keep sharing back to all of you. I love all of you who are coming and trying to learn more about subjects that have been so denied in policies of denial since at least World War II. God bless.